SeizeYourBusiness.com podcast with Tony Rourke and Kevin O'Flaherty.
SeizeYourBusiness.com, making you money.
Share it on Facebook, share it on LinkedIn,
Twitter, our blog, YouTube, video, listen to our podcast, getting so hot that it's burning up the stereo.
Welcome to the SeizeYourBusiness.com podcast, coming to you from our speakeasy in lovely downtown Downers Grove. Our guest today is Doreen Petty from Doreen Petty Coaching. Our hosts are Kevin O'Flaherty from O'Flaherty Law and myself, Tony Rourke from ADR Business Resource Group. If you find the podcast helpful, or if you just want to help us, we would appreciate it if you would review us on iTunes or share our podcasts on social media. So without further ado, I'll hand this off to Kevin.
So our topic today, Doreen, is going to be transitions in business. And thanks for being here, first of all.
You're welcome. Thanks for inviting me.
Tell us a little bit about your business.
My business is a professional coaching business that addresses transitions both in personal and professional lives. So for business owners, I have a division called Coaching the Boss, and it's all about being in the business of sustainable success. And when people make a transition into business ownership, something changes about their life, their expectations for themselves. It changes their identity. The same thing is true in personal life. So I work with people who are in navigating transitions associated with significant life events, divorce, separation, the dissolution of a business relationship, even people who are going through empty nesting. The identity of their relationship with other people changes. Mm-hmm. And the same thing happens in business. So my life coaching division is appropriately named We to Me Transition. So it's people who are shifting from a we to a me transition. But my business coaching is also a transition-based coaching business for entrepreneurs, new business owners, and small business owners who are making significant changes in their business by choice or because of influences in the environment.
Cool. So we've sat down and grabbed lunch several times, and I've always walked away learning something from you. You've got a lot of knowledge in that head about business. What are some of the biggest things that you see business owners struggling with, just in general, and pieces of advice that you can give to business owners?
Most people struggle. Well, one thing is people don't know what they don't know. So when people make assumptions or interpretations within their environment without really exploring themselves first and growing a sense of self-awareness, it can skew everything they see around them and everything that goes on in their business. So what I see as the key most important criteria or trait that a leader in business needs to have, it's self-awareness. Everything else comes from that.
What are some strategies that you employ to help people find that self-awareness?
A lot of it is an inquiry-based coaching process where I really talk to people about what they see as true for them in their future, where they see their truth right now, and I try to find a way to establish the gap to find what's going to happen, where their path is. Mm-hmm. So a lot of times just the process of exploring a vision of the future teaches people about themselves. I also have various assessments and processes that really keep people focused internally. And it's interesting, but I call it a selfishness. That in order for people to be successful in coaching, and frankly, one of my fundamental truisms, that everybody can benefit from coaching, but one of the things that helps people be successful is if they're willing to be a little selfish about it and really focus on investing time and effort in themselves to define themselves as that business owner, as that successful person.
I'm so sad that we only have like a half hour-ish because what I'm hearing from you, which I think is something I've always believed in, there's your whole idea transition really speaks to the whole idea that there's a reality and then there's a vision.
Yes.
And then there's a gap.
Yes.
It's a big gap sometimes. And it sounds like you help people get through that gap, because that gap is really big, scary, strange.
I help people first define what that future vision is. So when they say what will be true, or I ask them, what can be true for you if? And there's a lot of ways to ask that question. But once we start creating that vision, and we have visioning exercises that get sometimes a little too touchy-feely for business owners, but once they commit to it, it actually works out quite well. But it's really a process of going into that future and examining what's true. And our brains have the amazing capacity, as soon as we assign something to it, and this is my psychology background talking, but as soon as we assign a task to our brain, even if we're not sure, even if we don't realize we're doing it, our brain actually starts working on it while we're not paying attention.
Okay.
So visioning works exactly that way. When I start asking questions, when I center people into that space where they're looking at their future, they learn a lot about themselves without a lot of intervention on my part. And then when we pull back and talk about what's true now, then that path becomes a little clearer. So I help people understand what's blocking them from entering that path. So one of the key questions I'll ask people is, what do you want? And then as soon as they tell me that, my next question is, why don't you have it? What's blocking you from getting to that place? Because that's the path. And the goal, that vision, is really a goal. And the goal might as well be a picture on the wall. Because once you define the goal, once you know what it looks like, once you can touch it and feel it and see it, it becomes the reward for doing everything you need to do to get there. So all the work happens on the path. So that path is the gap between what's true now and what can be true in the future. The tighter we can define what that future vision is, the shorter that path gets.
Sure.
Okay. I got wow, got that.
So I've tried to start writing a book on how to be successful in business, and I thought my first chapter was going to be defining your vision for where you want your business to be and what results you're looking for in your business. But I had to bump a chapter in front of it as to finding out why you're working in the first place. What's important to you? And I've heard you talk about finding your why, and can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. Finding the why. The why is the purpose. So when we can identify why, and it means something to us cognitively and emotionally, there's something I call the CAB map. There's a cognitive and affective, or emotional, and then a behavioral. So everybody has their own CAB map. We engage ourselves intrinsically through our cognitive and emotional processes. And then what we show up with in the world is our behavioral. That's the only thing people can see. So when we want to know why we're doing something, if we lean too much towards the cognitive or too much towards the emotional, we lose the balance. So translating that into behaviors can be somewhat dichotomous in terms of creating an equilibrium for ourselves. So when we know that why, it actually contributes to the balance. So why would I start a coaching business? Why would you become a lawyer? Why are you doing the things that you're doing today? And why, more importantly, and what comes first actually, is why would you aim towards that goal that is here and in your heart, in your head? Why would you choose that? What's going on? What's really going on? Because sometimes we choose things because we think we should. Sometimes we choose things because we don't feel we have another choice. Sometimes we choose things because we're tolerating something in our lives. This all comes back to the sense of self-awareness. If we can build the why, then again, the gate to that path becomes a little easier. And as you found in just exploring it, the vision becomes a little more real.
Sure. And if you have the why figured out, if you know why you're working, what you want your business to do for you ultimately, that becomes kind of a razor that you can use to make decisions.
Yes.
And for me, the reason I'm working isn't to be a famous attorney. It's to free up time to spend with my children. So when I'm presented with a networking opportunity in the evenings, it defeats the whole purpose of what I'm doing. And I'm able to make that decision. No, I'm not going to go to that cocktail hour, because the whole reason I'm working in the first place is to spend time with my kids. And that, so you have to kind of have a philosophical center and an understanding of why you're doing what you're doing in order to
It's a personal strategy. The why does define the razor, and it's not like Occam's razor. It's not the simplest. It's almost never. In decision making, it's all about being choiceful and recognizing that you're not just making one decision. You're making a multitude of decisions on a daily basis, and every time you say yes to one thing, you're saying no to something else. And being aware of that and understanding how it fits into your ultimate result or your ultimate goal for yourself and your strategy, that all ties back into the why, into that self-awareness. But it's a personal strategy.
Let me ask you a question about that, because I know a lot of the people that I know Kevin and I are trying to target are either business owners or people who want to become business owners. Now,
My favorite people.
Within the context of corporations and how they lay off people and let people go, we know that a lot of people make a decision to go into a business with the purpose of making money, but that's not a good enough purpose. That purpose will skew you very quickly. So what kind of tips can you give somebody that will, one, let them recognize that that's where they're at? Because sometimes you just don't really get that you're in it for the money, which is okay to be in it for the money, but that's not a strong enough purpose. And
unless you have a really great widget to sell.
True. But how do you help somebody, within that gap, and when they're trying to figure out their vision, their reality, how do you move them off of the money path and into a true purpose?
It's actually quite easy because it's called the 5 whys.
I've heard that.
And it's something that's been around for decades, and I started using it back in the day in the corporate world, working with leaders, executives, developing leaders, and in that.
And how does that work?
Well, we need to find the core of the why. And so if somebody says, I never assume the first answer is the actual answer, because it doesn't give me anything fed from the intrinsic source of what's going on. So if somebody says, so you say, I say, why do you want to start this business?
Because I want to make money.
Okay, great. Why do you want to make money?
Because I don't want to be broke.
Okay, that's great. That makes perfect sense to me. Why don't you want to be broke? What does that mean to you?
For me personally, that's like a prison.
Okay, I can see that's a great analogy to think about that as a prison. So what is it about being in that kind of prison that creates that barrier to you? Because I can sense that there's almost a fear associated with that. Tell me more about that.
Tony just slipped into a coaching session.
I just roared.
So you asked me how the 5 whys.
I asked you. I mean, for a prison point of view, I've got my 2 kids that I they're older, so taking care of them is not really the point, but it is kind of the point down the road. I have dreams of moving and living in South Carolina. My girlfriend's down there.
Awesome.
So I've just got a big old plan, and of course I got to fund that plan.
Sure.
And so that's why to me, I say prison because I'll be trapped here.
Okay. That makes perfect. That's very reasonable because you've got a very powerful why. Your future vision of how you see yourself in that space, and where it is. You have a pretty good sense of when it is.
Oh, yeah.
And you know who the stakeholders are in the process as you move forward.
Okay.
So why does it come back to that money question? There's something else that's in that why, Tony, that I can almost hear in your answer that goes beyond the money. So tell me what that is.
I don't know. That's why I'm asking you. No.
So think again about what you said. So everything that you told me was really about the relationships you have with other people. So where does that come into it?
Relationships matter. I mean, a lot.
Okay.
And to me, I'm just speaking for myself. It's really hard to be solid and serious in whatever your relationships are. If you're chasing the buck, if that's the motivation, if that's the drive, do a pretty good job of staying out of that space
Mhm.
because that's an ugly place to be.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the night, you're very empty. Even if you
Right.
get a good check, you're still empty.
Yeah.
Empty as heck. So for me, I know I'm rooted in really grounded with my kids, girlfriend, friends,
Sure.
family, things of that sort.
Well, thank you for playing our game.
No problem. Thank you for putting me on the
But
spot
that's-
like that I put myself into trying to help you out.
And I apologize for that. Normally,
No,
I
that's
would
okay.
normally I would ask permission before I jump into that, but that's the process of
Okay.
just pulling the why until there's a core reality that the money is actually feeding something else. So the
Yes.
real goal, the real vision is that space, that time, those relationships.
Mhm.
And the money is a way to get there.
Ways
So
to
when you
means.
put it into that focus and you recognize what's actually going on, then that strategy, that razor for being choiceful becomes clearer.
Nice. Your turn, Kevin. I want to see you sweat.
Well, something that struck me that you said, and I've heard you say this before, and it really rings true, is that when you say yes to one thing, you're saying no to everything else. And I find, we talked about this morning when we saw each other, I find myself sometimes in the marketing and networking space
Mm-hmm.
feeling like, okay, I'm putting effort into something where I can't see concrete results right away.
Right.
And I might be, spending 3 days working on a project that may or may not pay dividends, and what else
Right.
could I be doing? And it's really difficult to. It's one thing as an attorney to bill hours and know that if I'm sitting in my desk billing hours, I've got money coming in.
Mm-hmm.
Once you get out of the actual billing space and you're working on growing the business, finding the right strategy and feeling like you're working on moving the business forward is a little bit more ephemeral. It's difficult to determine. So this is more me just spouting than a real question, but to spin this into a question for you, what in your own personal decision-making process, how do you make sure you're pursuing the right opportunities with your time, and what's the razor that you use to make those decisions?
A lot of it is, I call it a golden thread. So I understand what my expectations for my future, my vision of that future is. I know what my path looks like. I've done the work. I'm a coach. All coaches have coaches. So I work with other people to kind of stay on track. A big thing that a coach provides people is an accountability partner, kind of brings another brain to the mix.
Mm-hmm.
But everybody has to have that strategy. So mine, I tie it to a golden thread strategy that says I need to be able to see what I'm doing, how it's contributing to that future vision. So if I can define that, if I can define a golden thread, that doesn't mean I need a golden thread for everything, because sometimes I just want to play. And if I give myself that permission to say, I can fit this in, I can just go to a movie, go to a play, I can play golf, which I haven't done in a very long time, which I really would like to. So there's other activities that I want to get. Just read a book.
Sure.
Or even just watch a television show. If I know that I am balancing my golden threads and I'm making choiceful decisions that are for me, because I get to be selfish too sometimes.
Sure.
And that's really what it comes in. So I have this vision of these really thick golden threads and these very thin golden threads, but I have a sense, a very choiceful, deliberate sense of what I do and how it contributes to my ultimate result.
Okay. Let's talk about a little bit about transitions in business.
Okay.
How do you tell me a little bit about how you help business owners make transitions?
Transitions, change is the only constant. So change is happening all the time. Change is like a line in the sand. Something was true and now it's not. Something wasn't true and now it is.
Mm-hmm.
The transition is everything that happens around that. The transition happens in preparation for change, and transition happens as a result of change. We manage transitions. We exist in transitions. We are at the effect of transitions and change. When I work with business owners, what I do is help them identify the transitions that they're going through. What is the change maybe? But the focus is really on what's true now, because we have to believe that everybody is exactly where they need to be to move forward. Otherwise, I don't know anybody that's building a time machine. As soon as someone has one, I want to know about it. So we have to believe we're right where we need to be to move forward. And then that future. So my focus in coaching is always on what's true now, what will be true in the future. And I tend to turn those around. What's going to be true in the future and what's true now. And when I'm working with people who are in transition, I'm helping them understand what that future is, what is true now, and what they want from themselves. Because a lot of times in transition, it's not just stuff changing. It's not just shifting sands. It's actually an identity shift. I always like to say people who are becoming business owners are doing so. They're transitioning from being a normal person to being a business owner. And that's no less true for the people who have felt over the past decade, or actually downsizing activity has been going on for more than 2 decades, really since the 80s, so 3 decades. So there are people in the business owner environment who are in that environment because they feel they had no other choice. The reality is everything is a choice. And so the other thing that I help people do is to manage their transitions. I help them understand that there is a choice in everything they do. And so we get deliberate about identifying those choices, and that has a positive effect on being able to manage the transition.
That is awesome.
Yeah, transitions are easy.
I like how when we're
I like to say that without a straight face.
Are golden threads synonymous with actions?
Not necessarily. Golden threads exist. If I take an action, it may or may not be a golden thread towards my future vision.
Okay.
Actions are part of strategies, action planning. So we do like a marketing plan or a business plan. The whole idea is to get to the point where you can go through the various planning processes so you can tie it eventually to an action plan where there are actually tasks that can be measured and monitored and all of that stuff. But not every task is going to have the same level of golden thread. Sometimes we have to do something like what you're doing, Kevin, with trying to make some choices about where you're spending your time, what you're eventually going to outsource, what you're going to do yourself, where's the value in that. So even a golden thread may be something you're not even doing yourself. It may be something that you decide is not my core business. So I'm going to, like with the sales stuff that I was talking about, it's not my core business.
Right.
I tend to, if I try to sell something to someone, I end up coaching them. And then what do they need me for?
Giving them free advice.
Exactly. I'm learning how to be, that's an ongoing lifetime experience. So even outsourcing can be a very thick golden thread. Okay. Because it can contribute.
Okay, got it.
To that future.
So it's basically something that helps bring the vision into reality.
Yes, it is the steps on the path.
Okay, got it.
So if you're familiar with mind mapping techniques, I have what I call an interrogative goal dependency chart that I use to help people become more deliberate about the choices they're making and about what that path looks like. And it's interrogative because it goes through the who, what, why, when, where, how. And it takes people down the path to, what's going to be true, what's true now, who's all involved. There's lots of boxes around, but the whole path is kind of a timeline, but it also has fish bones coming off of it. So everything that's contributing to that path, we can define and identify. And it's a mind mapping technique that I use to just really explore through inquiry, asking a lot of spacious, open-ended questions to really help people create that vision on paper, especially when they have a harder time seeing it. When it's harder, it's not as easy as just brick and mortar stuff when you're trying to imagine and create that vision. So sometimes we try to do it pictorially that way.
Cool.
And having a strategic plan, whether it's, in your fishbone visual or the timeline that it represents, or just having here's the tasks I need to accomplish to achieve this sub goal of this bigger goal, that it really makes you feel like you're moving forward with your business. When you're
Absolutely.
when I have months where I'm knocking those out of the park and knocking down those tasks, I know that I'm actually working on the business rather than in the business and building towards my goal. When I have months where I'm returning a lot of emails and not actually crushing the task that I want to be working on, that can be very frustrating. So it's, just having something that you need to get to if you want to get closer to your goal, and having it on paper is a huge tool.
And one of the other things that it contributes to is that sense of self-awareness. Sometimes people want that concrete picture, because what's actually happening is people need that self-awareness because they're making choices also about how they're showing up in their own life, showing up as a business owner, showing up with the kind of energy. When one of the things I teach people is how to show up with the kind of positive energy that attracts other positive energy.
Mm-hmm.
The predominant energy in the world is actually a negative energy.
Sure.
You can prove it just by walking into a grocery store. I have a rule that I've given myself a few years ago, is that if I'm in a grocery store, before I get in a line, I look to see if I can find somebody who's having a bad day, like a cashier who seems to be grumpy, that's not smiling, and that's the line I get in, because it's a challenge to myself to try to make a difference for that person in that moment. And I use my energy to try to influence a different kind of energy. Negative energy is very, very powerful, and it can cause people to feel at the effect of what's going on in their lives. And if we're going to be successful business people, if we're going to be successful people, leaders of our own lives, then we need to be able to manage how we're showing up day to day. That starts with that self-awareness. It starts with being able to commit to our vision and understand. That doesn't mean the vision doesn't change, because we add more paint every time something significant happens in our lives. But that vision is ours. And how we show up walking that path, because like I said, all the work is in the path. And those choices that we make are critical to success.
So to kind of swing back to transitions, when you're working through a transition with a business owner or just a person, is your first step to identify that you're even in a transition and what that transition is, and kind of look at the characteristics, or what's step one of the process?
Usually by the time people get to me, they know they're in some kind of transition. And that's
I'm not talking about divorce necessarily.
They might not be able to spell it out, but they know there is something.
They're making a choice. They're maybe confused by a lack of progress. Maybe they're doing a lot of things for their business, but not getting the results. Something might be blocking them. It might be something, most of the time it's inside ourselves, that we have these little gremlins that are moving around inside of our heads. They're pieces of us that are protecting us. Oh, don't do that. Might be a little scary. You might not get it to work. Or we may make interpretations. The confirmation bias that is very obvious now that we're in a political season. People tend to look for things that confirm whatever they already believe. When business owners do that, they lose a lot of focus and a lot of options, because they're focused only on what they already believe. And that can be the kiss of death for businesses, not being able to open their options and use the energy to turn it into a prism effect. And I swear I'm not a new agey kind of person. I just realized that sounded just like a new agey kind of person, but no, I don't have crystals in my pocket.
You're not talking about, I understand what you're saying. You're talking about what you put out into the world.
Yeah, so it's that kind of energy that we put out in the world. When it's positive, it opens up a lot of options for us. Mm-hmm. When it's negative, it tends to close us out from the options. So when we're working from a business perspective, one of the first things, to actually answer your question, one of the first things that I do is a little bit of exploration, the whole why process. So why is it important to talk to me? What's going on for that future vision, and where is the transition, personal, professional, where are I always focus on, what do you want for yourself? What do you want in that future? What does it look like? Before I even get into the purpose. So that's one of the starts. But then it really goes right into the self-awareness. I probably get into the self-awareness even before I realize it, because it's all about, what do you know about yourself? And when we do start talking about it, I tend to ask questions like, so what did you learn about yourself in that space? Because that we always do. There's always something there, but we almost never ask that question ourselves.
Sure. No.
So that's a key factor. If people can just start asking, if people can start catching themselves and just asking themselves that question, what did I learn about myself there? Or what actually went on right then? What choice did I actually make, and what choice could I have made if I had known something different? So those kinds of questions can be really powerful self-motivators.
Awesome. Just awesome. I could talk to her for a week.
Yeah, she's
long
good.
podcast.
And I can talk for a week.
Something that I've found is that as you're, moving towards, you start your business and you've got your end game in mind. Here's what retirement looks like for me, or here's what a success looks like for me. Kind of, and I keep coming back to your fishbone visual. Every step along that process, it's a constant transition. You can never. I suppose there's some non-entrepreneurial business owners that can say, okay, I'm making enough cash flow to cover what I want, save a little bit. I'm just going to keep running the business this way for the next 30 years. The people that are listening to this podcast aren't those type of business owners. They're looking, how can I make it bigger? How can I get to the next level? And literally every week or every day, as your business moves forward along your plan, you're going through a new transition. You're having to learn how to do new things. I'm, learning how to do Photoshop and video editing and like you brought up this morning, I should probably be outsourcing that, but learning how to podcast, which I didn't expect to be learning, 2 months ago. It's there's never for a true entrepreneur, there's never a comfort zone where you're always operating outside your comfort zone, and it sounds like you can help with that.
Sure, because the comfort zone is it's kind of a vacuum. And you can't create change in a vacuum. And imagine if we lived our lives at the effect of everything else, if we decided it wasn't important for us to control our own destiny, our own expectations for ourselves, what power do we have to actually affect change? What power do we have to create the path that will get us to that goal? So one of the key factors that I work with business owners on, and really everybody that I'm coaching, it's all about personal responsibility. It's about being able to take responsibility for everything that goes on in your life, even the things that you think happen to you. Because if you think something happens to you, that means you're going to judge it and you're going to try to find somebody to blame for it, something or somebody. And as soon as you do that, you give away any power you had to affect change to make that better. So I'd much rather take responsibility for everything I do and everything that happens in my environment, because then I retain the power to create that change. And that's what I try to help business owners understand, is the power in the responsibility, and the fact that who wouldn't want to be in control of their lives rather than being at the effect of their lives. Yeah.
Well, and I've had some relationships go south with key employees before. And, it's what you just said spoke to me, because when that happened, I wasn't thinking, man, that jerk employee that, they really screwed me over. What I was thinking is, how could I have, next time when I get the replacement, how am I going to manage differently so that the relationship doesn't, go south? And the people that are operating in your universe can affect you, but it really comes down to you for how you're going to deal with all the input that you get and then change your output.
There's another fundamental truism that speaks to that, is everything that I do and say, believe and think and feel is all on me. It doesn't have anything to do with anybody else. Yep. Everything that everyone else says and does and thinks and feels is all about them and has nothing to do with me. So even if someone appears, like I hear this all the time, well, they made me so mad. And my response to always that was, why would you choose to be mad? Because what that person did was all about them. It didn't really have anything to do with you. If you allow yourself to believe that somebody else did something that created a reaction in you, then again, you're giving away the power. How can you change something that somebody else made happen? So it comes back to that responsibility. So when you choose, it's that level of what you were talking about in terms of the relationship is actually looking at yourself, looking through the other side of the mirror, as I say it, and checking, well, geez, what exactly went wrong here? What was my role in it?
Mm-hmm.
What will I need to do differently?
Sure.
What can I do differently to make that better? And that's a question a business owner can ask themselves and answer. Believe me, they all have the answer.
Sure.
What can be better tomorrow, given everything that happened today?
If I had blamed my college girlfriend for breaking up with me rather than evaluate how I could be a better person, that my wife would still be way out of my league and never would have dated me in the first place.
See, there you go.
Amen to that. We've all been there. I mean, self-evaluation.
And that level, and I've told you in the past that I've always seen you as quite a really self-aware person, and that just points to that same reality.
Oh, thank you. Do you have a favorite business book? I know you do, but what is your favorite business book?
I've got, there's a saying in my family, or actually a teasing in my family that goes on, is anytime anyone ever mentions a book, somebody else always says, Doreen has that book. or if anyone mentions a topic, and doesn't matter what the topic is, and you'd be surprised at how eclectic my library is, but somebody is bound to say, Doreen has a book for that. So there are actually quite a few. I love The Tipping Point because I think it tells people something about what can be true. It really helps people imagine the what if scenarios. What would have to be true if? That's one of my favorite questions. What would have to be true if? And then I also like Michael Bridges' Managing Transitions.
Yeah, very apropos to our topic.
Yes, because that's a really good one. So his first book was Transitions, and then he did Managing Transitions, and there are actually some exercises and things like that that go through that. And then there's also there's a book on energy leadership that isn't so much a business book as it is a coaching book. But it was written by Bruce Schneider, and he's the founder of where I've gotten some of my credentials. And that is all about using that positive energy, using that, how you're showing up, what mix of energies are unique to my client or whoever, and to help them understand how they're using that to show up. And the energy leadership book that Bruce wrote really goes through a lot of those processes. It kind of follows one of his cases, one of his client scenarios, and goes through how energy really plays a part in our lives. So I tend to give that book away. And then the 100 to 0 ratio, or what is it? 100 to 0. A guy named Al Ritter, who's a management consultant locally here. I was really impressed with some things he said in a networking thing. So I invited him for coffee, and we had coffee one morning, and we were still there at lunchtime having a conversation. And ever since then, I've been giving away this 100 to 0 principle. It's the 100 to 0 principle. And it basically teaches people in a very simple way to take responsibility, 100% responsibility 100% of the time, and expect 0 in return. And it's amazingly empowering.
Wow.
To help people understand how to 100% of the time, 100% responsibility 100% of the time, expecting nothing in return. That creates a power for self-awareness, self-expression, showing up without engaging anything else and without giving yourself an opportunity to judge. So that is it's a wonderful way to look at how we expose ourselves to our environment through the way we show up, through the behaviors we choose.
That's interesting, because if you follow that philosophy through and expect nothing in return, you're going to get a whole lot in return.
Oh, absolutely.
Just
because
by
the
not
positive,
expecting it.
Positive
Wow.
energy, another fundamental truism. Energy attracts like energy. So the energy you put out is the energy you're going to get back. And it's weird. It's absolutely freaky how it happens. But I've proven it to myself, and my clients have proven it to themselves over and over again. If you put out that negative energy, if I get in that line with that cashier who's grumpy and I'm grumpy back, what am I accomplishing? I'm just engaging more negative energy. if I allow her grumpiness or his grumpiness to affect my mood, I'm making that choice.
Mm-hmm.
So my role then in that space is to try to make a difference from a positive energy. And it feels fantastic when I get that smile or I get that laugh.
I love how Tony takes notes for himself throughout the show, so he can.
If I don't get that out, I'm done.
You're welcome to type up the show notes for us anytime you want. Well, and all of the books that you recommend.
Let me know, and I'll publish it as a blog.
Wow, that is just wow.
And we'll have show notes that'll have all the books you talked about linked to them, so you can certainly publish that. But how can people reach you if they want to hire you?
I have websites. DoreenPettyCoaching.com is the primary website. That one also links to my primary business coaching side, the Coaching the Boss, which is my business coaching and HR. I do some HR consulting, strategic kind of stuff. And I have business choice coaching is where I do my training content out of it. And then my life coaching is We to Me Transitions, all of them .coms. But DoreenPettyCoaching.com has, and people can read my blogs and also send an inquiry to me. And you have my phone number. I mean, that's my phone number's on the websites also.
Okay. Well, thanks so much for your time today, Doreen. It was
Thanks for having
very
me.
educational as always.
This has been fun.
Extremely useful.
Do want those notes though. Thanks, Tony. Thanks, Kevin.
Thanks, Doreen.